Oh, there's Will. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody who's on. Is it afternoon yet, Mark? Yeah, I guess it should be, eh?
It is, yeah. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So welcome to today's session. We've got about 10 minutes before we start, so feel free to top up your coffee or even get any questions into the chat off the hop for Brad.
Especially if there's any questions, Mark, from last week that are
Yep,
just
it's a good
sort of
note.
hanging over. One thing I can tell them, Mark, they're going to be very, very, very happy. Not like, I think you got the good one, Mark. Not like the grain side.
Yeah, and news might be a little bit more positive this week than last week.
Well, even the USDA report that came out late Friday is actually going to help things a lot.
Yeah.
Fed cattle are already up. Feeder cattle are up today.
Where's that picture from, Brad? In your background?
You know, I can't remember, honestly, where I got that picture. I don't think I took that picture. I don't remember that background. It could be on the edge of southern Nebraska when we were out looking at my feedlots that are south of Lincoln and in that rolly hill land. But I don't remember physically taking that picture.
Yeah. Yeah, could easily be driving south of Maple Creek up into the
Well,
site for
and that's
sales
one of the
areas
reasons
as
it
well.
could have been too, right? Like, I get up into that area an awful lot too, right?
Yeah.
Also at a Assiniboine, Assiniboia, there's a feedlot down there there was a feedlot down there. So I don't know if that's where I took it or did somebody send it to me? Because I get a lot of pictures sent to me right?
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Mark. There was
Sorry, Brad.
well, good afternoon, everybody. We're just waiting. Got another 4 or 5 minutes, 6 minutes, maybe 5 minutes. We'll get started. Everybody that's here, you're going to be very, very happy. Not like the grain guys.
Yeah, we'll get started in about 5 minutes. I'm just going to post in the chat a link to register for our upcoming Family Farm Succession webinar. That's going to take place on March 3rd. So we'll be joined by Doug Carroll, who is an estate and tax specialist with Avisa Wealth. So a real great resource to get started with some family farm succession planning. So I'm going to drop the registration link in the meeting chat here, and we'll get started on the cattle outlook at 1 p.m. As people are joining and we wait to get started, I'm also going to post a link in the chat here, which will be where the cattle session recording will be posted on our website. So we're going to post that by February 4th, and you'll be able to access the content through this link. Good afternoon, everybody, and everyone that's joined. We're going to get started in a couple minutes here, but just a reminder, if you have any questions that you want to ask Brad, whether it's up front about livestock outlook, or if you joined us for our grain commodities outlook last week, if you have any lingering questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Okay, we're 1 o'clock. Brad, you ready to get started? I'll get us kicked off.
Yeah, let's go.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the second session of our Ag Speaker Series, the Cattle Outlook. So my name is Mark Clements. I'm the Vice President of Business Advice with Innovation Federal Credit Union. And on behalf of Innovation and Innovation Wealth, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to today's webinar. Off the hop, in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, we want to acknowledge that we're on traditional territories of many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who have graced these lands for millennia. We're all privileged to live, work, and enjoy the benefits of these lands, now known as Canada. And I join you today from Treaty 4, homeland of the Métis. We're happy to have roughly 160 attendees registered from across Canada for this session. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to run through just a couple housekeeping items for our webinar. So we're using Microsoft Teams for this webinar. If you're new to Teams, please note that the webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available on our website soon after the session, and I've put the link to where that recording will be in the chat. So that'll take you to our website where we'll house the recording. For attendees, your video has been turned off and your audio is set to mute. So that'll allow our presentation today to go smoothly. But we 100% encourage you to ask questions in the chat through the session. Brad's really keen on having his sessions being interactive, and then, we feel that's the way everybody will get the most out of today. We'll monitor your questions and answer them as time goes on. If you do have technical difficulties at any time, just post that in the chat and let us know. When in doubt, the old refresh your browser or exit or do a restart is always a good place to start. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to today's speaker, Mr. Brad Magnusson. So Brad spent the last 39 years plus working with producers and businesses to do strategic business planning and help enhance profitability. 39 years, Brad. I think you were saying you were about 12 when you got going, but
12 or 13. I think it's more like 40 or 41 now, Mark, but let's not go there.
Sounds good. So Brad's the CEO of Magnusson Consulting Group, which provides marketing intelligence to a variety of businesses on a global basis. Brad's held senior positions with multinational financial institutions, government lending institutions, and Credit Union Central of Manitoba. Brad spent all of his working career providing global ag analysis and market intelligence. He's responsible for the analysis and forecasting of macroeconomic and financial market developments, grain and livestock market analysis in Canada, the United States, and key overseas economies. He's traveled extensively with over 800 producer groups, businesses, and credit unions to present seminars, workshops, and courses in every corner of Canada and the US. And he's been a keynote speaker at the American Bankers Conference, Credit Union National Banking Conference, and a past board member of the Manitoba and National Agrologists Association and past board member of the Manitoba Rural Adaptation Council. So want to welcome Brad to the webinar, and I'm going to pass it over to you, Brad. Let you take it from here. And again, really looking forward to people's questions throughout the session. Should be an interesting session. As Brad said, we've had some positive bumps even in the last week or so in cattle markets.
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everybody. We're in for, I think, hopefully, a very good beef outlook this year. Probably one of the best that I've delivered. As Mark said, both Mark and I, when we started working together, we had a full head of hair, and now maybe not so much. But I think that there's lots happening within the beef industry. Some of the things that are being talked about, I'm going to try also to talk about what's not being said, how much beef is coming in from other countries like Uruguay, Paraguay, New Zealand, Australia, Brazil, Argentina, that may have an effect as we go through 2026, 27, 28. So as Mark said, and for anybody that's listened to me in the past, I think a lot of you have, make sure that you get your questions into the chat. Mark's going to be monitoring the chat because I won't be able to see it because I'll have the slides up. So without further ado, let's dive right in. I've got an awful lot of information that we need to go through, so we're gonna start off right away with my calendar. Yeah, come on, hurry up. There we go. Everybody see that? You can see that, Mark?
Yep, looks
Yep.
good.
Okay. So one thing that I think that everybody hopefully appreciates is I'm very straightforward. I'm not going to tell you something that I don't believe. I am not a government employee. We ran cattle. We've been in the cattle, or we started in the cattle business in 1882 up until 2008, I guess. We had upwards of 450 cows. We fed about 1,000. And I've spent my lifetime working with cattle producers, both in Canada and the United States, and actually a number of other countries. So big feedlots, big cattle operations, small feedlots, everything. I don't think there's anything that I haven't seen over the 40-ish years of doing this. But one of the things that I've never seen actually is cattle numbers in the U.S. By the way, this is absolutely brand new numbers that came out over about 12 o'clock Saskatchewan time on Friday. And we look at our cattle numbers. This is all cattle and calves in the United States. And I'll get into the beef numbers here in a second, but just looking at this, and of course, when we started, I started looking at the beef industry back when I was a kid. I remember 1974, we had about 140 million cattle and calves in the United States. Mark, I'm going to apologize right now. I get this twang when I talk about cattle, so I'm going to apologize right now about it. But right, we're just over 85 million head cattle. Tremendous decline in the cattle numbers. A lot of my compadres down in the United States, I don't care if it's Dr. David Cole at Virginia Tech University, or I'm not dropping names here, but Iowa, if we go to a lot of the universities, the ag economists, particularly the livestock ag economists, really question if the American cattle herd will come back significantly, even in the next generation. Rangeland is just getting so expensive in the United States, as is it here in Canada. You've got to be making one heck of a pile of dollars per calf or per fed cattle sold to be able to buy some of that land. There was just this morning came out that in certain states now we're getting over the 12.5 to $15,500. That would be more for grain land, but we're still looking at $35, $45, $5,500 an acre for cow ground. So that's getting very, very expensive. Now let's get into the detail of this, and this is where it's so important. Total number of cows in 2026, or total cattle, was 86 million. All cows was 37 million, but let's jump down into our beef cow numbers. Our beef cow numbers are sitting here at about 27.6. That's about a 1% decrease, ladies and gentlemen, in the beef cow herd. Dairy cows were up about 2%. Don't get all bent out of shape about that. The price of milk right now, I could see us probably dropping that 2%, or at least moving a fair number of the old cows out of the dairy herd in the United States. Not a lot of profitability in the dairy industry right now. What's interesting about this, if we go to our 500 pound heifers and less, we're down over about 0.6%. Our beef replacement heifers are up 0.9%, but take the 0.9%, add it to the 1% of the beef cow decrease, and we're basically at zero growth, maybe even 0.1 negative growth. Dairy heifers now, what leads credence to my conversation about the dairy industry, look at the dairy heifers. They're down 0.3%, means that we're probably stagnant in our dairy, and we're really not going to build, when we get through these lower dairy numbers, especially in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, California, The big dairy states, Arizona, we probably going to end up being 0% growth in my mind. Other heifers down 1.5%. If we look at our steers, 0.6 down. Our bulls, incredibly small amount. 0.3 is negligible. And again, we don't know what's going to happen with those. I'm going to show you something that's kind of interesting a little bit later on. All cattle on feed, all sizes, about 13.847. That's down about 3.3%. And that means that, the amount of beef that's going to be coming into the market is going to be less and less. Our calf crop, which is really, really interesting, sitting at about 32, let's call it 32.9. And that's down 1.6%. So what can I tell you about this? It tells me essentially that we're not building herd in 2026 where we thought we would normally see that 26 would have been a rebuilding year under a normal 10-year cattle cycle. The last I've tracked cattle cycles since 1863, which is the sort of the opening date of the Chicago. And usually in this 26 year, in the history, we would have seen some building of herd. Probably around 2 to 4%, a little bit more in 2027. That's not happening. So I think that, in the beef cow numbers, if you're a cow guy, cow girl, that's very, very positive going into 27 and even have an impact on 28. So what's, I guess I get ahead of myself, Mark, I'm sorry, but, we haven't completely transitioned out of the bottom of the cycle yet. What's happening is record prices are established, that feeder market. What's also happening when I talk to my cow guys, I don't care if it's in Saskatchewan or Manitoba, Alberta, or if it's in Oklahoma or Texas, Nebraska. A lot of guys are selling. What they're doing is they're definitely keeping back some heifers, but what they're doing is anything that is ornery as a cow, anything that jump fences, anything that's not in calf, they are letting go. And so, that balance point is that we're simply not building any significant herd. So, and we also, one of the things I'm going to show you a little bit later on is 2026 is starting out in the cow ground area, Oklahoma, Texas, going up into Nebraska, is very dry, and it was dry in 2025. 56% of the cattle herd was located in those areas experiencing abnormally dry conditions. And actually, that's what we have right now, and I'm going to prove it to you. So hay stocks were steady, but, we'll see what happens in this year's hay crop.
Brad, I'll give you a chance to grab a breath
Absolutely,
there,
just stop me.
Couple questions that have come into the chat right off the hop. So Kelly's got a question that I think will probably go to the heart of a lot of the conversation this afternoon. So Kelly's asking, what are the risks affecting our market in 2026 and driving our calf prices down this fall? He'll be looking for your thoughts on the risk of the US putting tariffs and or closing the border to Canadian imported beef. So that's maybe one for us to put a pin in, or
yeah, we could let's put a pin in that one. I think,
and,
Kelly, I think the incredibly intelligent question, and one that's very, very hard to predict, but I'm going to do it anyways. Typical me. First of all, the Dow. If you look at the history dating all the way back in the 1800s, late 1800s, the Dow is one of the most driving factors within the cow herd and the calf price. That's or what we would call now box beef. And that is, if we have a strong Dow, strong U.S. economy, and that's going to keep beef demand high. And I'm going to show you a couple of really interesting slides about that, Kelly, in a few minutes. One of the things, so the first thing is the Dow. We need to keep the Dow strong. We need to have momentum in the U.S. Economy. So far, going into, say, the 1st of February, Kelly, it's we're talking about 2.5% growth. Not great, actually. But but it's not terrible. It's not like Canada. It's basically 0% growth right now. I think we may even be in a technical recession as we go through February. We're already November, December, we're basically zero. And I think January is going to be zero or even negative yet again. But it's the US that drives cattle prices, obviously. The other thing that we're really, really, really paying attention to, and I need to get, the powers to be, the Manitoba or the Canadian Cattlemen's Association to start thinking about this, and the U.S. Cattle Association start to think about this, is the amount of beef that's coming in from other countries. And I'm talking about, just not cow beef. Like we used to, Canada brings a lot of cow beef in from Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, out of Madison, out of the cow plant in Pennsylvania. But how much beef are we bringing into North America, i.e., United States, from other countries like Brazil? And is that going to impact? The other thing is Mr. Trump won an election with the central red states that have a lot of cattle, and yet he has kind of at times being relatively negative. Like he says, oh, the beef price is getting too high, and then all of a sudden futures fall. So, I think those are the risk before we get to, and we'll chat about the Kuster agreement a little bit later on. But I would say that the Dow and the amount of beef that's coming in are the two, I guess, the bigger shocks that would happen into the North American, not the Canadian, but the North American beef market and cattle numbers or cattle prices.
Just kind of tied to your slide here right now, Brad, Sarah's got a question on whether you're tracking Canadian cattle inventory numbers as well on
Big
that.
time,
So
big yes. It's coming up, Sarah, every single day, basically, although they only come out twice. But I also have a pretty good in with the guys that work in the provinces with checking cattle for the various feeder associations. And that's actually certainly in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta. So it gives me a bit of an insight. Yes, we will. You got to always remember, though, Sarah, that the price of cattle in Alberta or Saskatchewan or Manitoba is never ever set in Canada. It is 100% a derivative. If you're in the cow market, the calf market, the fed cattle market, or the backgrounding cattle market, it comes out of Lincoln, Nebraska. And Lincoln gets its prices out of basically the Texas Panhandle market. So we always look at the U.S. first to see what's happening. That's going to drive the fed cattle market and the feeder cattle market out of Chicago, and we're going to follow off that to get to as combination between Lincoln, Nebraska, and Texas Panhandle. So that's why we actually look at the U.S. so in-depthly first before we go into the Canadian cattle numbers.
And then
So
I'll
let
you keep moving along, Brad. But one to probably earmark as we go along as well from Trent. He's making a comment about how slaughter weights have set new record highs, and asking what the percentage change year over year is in production of U.S. boxed beef.
I'm actually going to show him exactly. Trent, it is basically 19 days within the feedlot. And I'm going to show you the weights that are coming through right up until I think it's December, because we don't have Jan numbers out yet, Trent. But we will. In the feedlots that I kind of traipse around with and the people that I talk with, corn is cheap, barley's cheap. We're going to try to get some heavier cattle, and the box beef market is so strong. What am I trying to say here, Mark? The Safeway prices, right? Retail prices is what I'm trying to say, is so high that we're holding back those animals, putting a little bit more feed through them, getting them a little heavier than we normally would. But I'm going to actually show you that in detail. So great questions. So if we look at, total inventories are down about 0.04% from last year. But what you want to highlight here is 9% down since 2019. Now, beef cow numbers, I hate to tell you this, if you're a Manitoba producer, they're down a lot more. Manitoba's really in a bad situation. But beef cow numbers, we talked about, are down 1%. And of course, we already talked about the dairy and the calf market. We already talked about the steers, over 500 pounds in heifers. Combined, there's 1 million fewer head imported from Mexico, large imports to exports to Canada. So it looks like we're going to have tighter supplies in the US, and that's going to really fold over into our packing plants. This is what I wanted to show you. This is a phenomenal slide. This is out of Cattle Facts out of, I think it's Boulder, Colorado. Love these guys. They're kind of expensive to buy their website, but it is very, very good. If we look at 2024, 25, and 26, so draw your eyes to the right side. That's the last red line, and the two sort of yellowy lines, gold lines. Maybe I can put it that way. And that's going to be our all fresh retail beef price, and then our all fresh retail demand. So the red, orange, or gold color is going to be your all fresh demand, and that is incredibly important. U.S. all fresh retail beef price, we're getting well over the $9 a pound on average range. Of course, prime rib is going to be one heck of a lot more than our hamburger is, but overall, we're looking at incredibly strong demand side. Now, I often get asked, number one question is why? Well, first of all, the Dow. The other thing, though, is we've been the last, 20 years, we've been fed chicken, pork, chicken. And, maybe we're getting, as a society, particularly in the US, getting a little sick and tired of chicken. And Mark knows my thoughts about chicken. If it ain't red and beef, or even some good bison or something like that, deer backstrop's pretty good too, Mark. But anyways, let's digress. Strong demand. Now you got to think about this, because is this happening in Canada? Well, not so much. Okay. So the US seems to be driving, but I'll show you that too. What's interesting, though, is meat consumption is about the same, slightly down, as we project for 2026, just simply because of cost. We are getting beef into, and I don't want to say it, but a rich man's game. The top quality meat, I would argue, your prime rib, your sirloin steaks, your expensive restaurants. But I would say we have stable demand. If I date myself back to 1978, 79, 80, we were eating about 74.5 pounds of beef in the US every single year, per person, by the way. And now we're sitting somewhere around about 50, we could call it 59 pounds. So it's a pretty big fall off, compared to what we eat, compared to back in the 70s. Just telling you how old I am again, Mark. Our slaughter cattle numbers, though, slaughter was down 4.6% to about 29.6 million head, but also already down. 2022 wasn't that far back, but we're down 12%, ladies and gentlemen. This is slightly down from 2020, 2014, 2016, 30 million head. It remains about 5% above our very, very low year of 2015. Mark, you and I were talking about this before we opened up. This is something that you, as beef producers, should be looking at. It comes out around about 8 o'clock Saskatchewan time, on every Thursday. It did improve slightly because of the amount of snow that went through places like southern Michigan, Indiana, Illinois. But the big feeding states, Oklahoma, Texas, Nebraska, Kansas was spared a little bit. Kansas seems to be pretty good. But even in the southern tips of Nebraska, um, uh, North Dakota, South Dakota, and then Nebraska. Look at where it's dry. That's a big cattle feeding country. Of course, South Texas, North Texas, mid North Texas, very dry. Also, too, as we go through the state of Nevada, as we move across out of even Oregon is very dry in places of Washington, sort of in that more cattle growing areas. And this is going to be very, very important to us. Of course, it's very cold. Did you guys see Florida this morning? What would you feel like if you flew your kids to Florida and it was going to be -6 Celsius or -5 Celsius, whatever it is, in Florida today? Okay, sorry, I was laughing out loud. Um, but a very, very cold, and dryness or cold means dryness. So it's kind of interesting to see what's happening in the cattle growing area of the Midwest and southern United States. Cattle on feed, we already talked about sitting, somewhere around about 11.5 million head. I'll get more into that in a little bit. So let's switch out of the U.S. and let's start talking about, Canadian cattle.
Brad, maybe just before we do that,
Yeah,
we've got a
that's yeah,
couple
good time to break. Yeah.
questions in the chat that tie back to the U.S. So they're both kind of tied back to supply overall. So Vicky has a question around overall production. So can the U.S. draw from other countries to fill that demand and lower prices overall? So where are we going to see that supply coming from, and what's the potential for it? And then Kelly's got a follow-up question around why slaughter numbers are down. Is it a supply issue or a demand issue?
It's certainly not a demand issue. It's a supply issue. We looked at demand, we looked at supply. So it's definitely a supply issue, which brings us actually, though, Mark, to the next question, is can the U.S., can for that matter, Canada, but can the U.S. buy cattle, or sorry, beef, I would argue, out of quote unquote unusual places? And I would argue, yes, particularly like, even Venezuela, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Australia, New Zealand. And, the amount of beef coming in can certainly have an effect. And, the interesting part about it is the dynamics of the political system in the U.S. Is, I would argue that if you're Trump, you want to keep cattle prices high. But on the other side, Trump is getting hammered by the Democrats about the price of living, one of them being, of course, food, and beef is one of those key ingredients. So it's going to be a balance point. How much do we bring in? I think I have some charts on that coming up, Mark, to give you an idea of what we've got coming in, and will it fill it? No, it won't fill it completely, not unless they leave it wide open. And of course, we've got some problems with some issues down in southern Texas, or I shouldn't say southern Texas, but northern Mexico, with some issues with their cattle. That's if we cut back Mexican cattle, that's a lot of cattle. One of the feedlots that I work with is down in halfway between San Antonio and Houston, Texas, and they bring a tremendous amount of cattle in from Mexico. So that certainly could have an impact on beef supply too as well. So it's a balancing act. I think what Trump is trying to do is try to keep the retail prices reasonable, and by bringing in beef, and trying to shore up the supply that we have coming into the United States, or Canadian cattle going south. That's going to be the interesting thing. Is that going to be part of KUSTRA? But we're going to get into that in a little bit.
Thanks, Brad.
Okay, let's look at the cattle industry. Now, one of the things I do want to always, and Mark knows this, I always mention cattle facts. The data that us as economists use On the grain side is always going to be Stats Canada and or USDA. That's our source, our raw source of data. On the cattle side, that data is not available to us, so we have to go to CanFax. So what I'm going to show you, but CanFax does an incredible job of looking at that data and try to giving you an idea of what's going on. So if you're not a subscriber to CattleFax, and Mark knows I have no affiliation to CanFax. It's out of Calgary, Alberta. I know a lot of the people there. They're very, very, very good. And I'll disagree with them every once in a while, but I'll show you where I disagree with them. But it's in the data. That's simply where I'm getting my data from. So let's talk about the Canadian dollar. Now, one of the problems that we're having is our Canadian dollar continues to climb against the US. Well, why? The US economy is doing much better than the Canadian economy. Well, it has to do with risk. Traditionally, whenever there was poor conditions on a global basis, and we have relatively poorer conditions globally, the American dollar would inflate in value, let me repeat that, would inflate in value. In other words, places like Germany, China, Canada, Japan, what other European Union countries would buy American dollars, buy American bonds, and the bond price would rise and the American dollar would rise. Well, why then is the Canadian dollar going up against the American dollar? Well, it's because of the same person. It's because of unease with what's happening in the US. Now, regardless, I could care less if you are a Trump supporter or non-Trump supporter. It doesn't matter to me. I'm an economist. It's the other world, the other buyers of debt, and are saying, you know what we're going to do is we're going to sell off American bonds and we're going to buy Canadian bonds. That's a pretty damn good place to put their money. And that's actually what's happening. And that's then flows into, unfortunately for us as lenders, what happens is as the bond market strengthens, particularly either in the United States and or in Canada, we have to borrow against those bonds, and interest rates have a tendency, when bonds go up, interest rates have a tendency to go up too as well. So two impacts on the Canadian dollar going up. As cattle guys who are exporting around 82% of our beef to the United States, we don't like this. We want a low dollar. And in fact, one of the major mistakes I made last year was saying, hey, I'm thinking we're going to have a 68-cent dollar about November of 2025, and we didn't. And part of that was we never anticipated the issues that are going on and the result or the pushback from other countries in United States. I'm going to stop there, Mark. Is there any questions? Because this one's actually really important to us as cow guys and people. Sorry, cow ladies.
No fresh questions in the chat. Like when you were talking about sources of new supply into the States, there was a question around whether Trump had made some separate deals for Latin American beef, whether that's like South America, Argentina.
Mark, I'm not aware of any quote unquote special deals. Trump would like to, though, make special deals, and he's already started with a number of nations, but he does want to get himself out of the Kuster agreement and make bilateral agreements, not trilateral agreements, but bilateral agreements with Canada, and then with Mexico, then with Venezuela. Let's argue Argentina, Brazil. Because he does want to break, and I'm getting off topic here, but he does want to break up the BRIC countries to put pressure on China. But right now, I'm not familiar with any direct knowledge of specific deals. That doesn't mean that they're not there. I'm just saying that and I follow the U.S. Very, very closely. One thing, one of the big issues that we have is corn price, barley price. We have a very, 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 very big corn crop in the United States. We had record corn production. I think we had upwards of 190 million tons. Usually, we're um, or sorry, 100. We had yield of 189 bushels an acre. That's what I mean to say. But very, very, very. We had close to 90, well, to be exact, 89.5 million acres of corn last year in the United States, and that's then pushing down barley prices. So we got lots and lots of lots and lots of corn production. Decent barley crop this year. We're going to have some pretty significant carryouts. That is making those cattle more profitable. If there's one thing I can tell you about the feeding industry is we pay ridiculous attention to our corn and barley price. Also, too, depending on what the price gets to, in Lincoln or in Minneapolis on corn. Some of the hog guys, some of the cattle guys will be backhauling corn into Canada from United States, just depending on what that dollar does and what the barley price versus corn price is. So Alberta barley price there, that's as of last 2 weeks ago. So we're sitting close to $250. It can be a little bit more as you get closer to High River. Can be a little bit less if you're up into North Battleford, Tisdale, Swan River, Manitoba, north of Edmonton. But it just depends on basis. Canadian cattle numbers, of course, aren't out yet because Stats Canada doesn't. I'm not sure, Mark, what's happening with Stats Canada. They did say they're cutting quite a few staff. We don't like that as economists. But our total number of cattle and calves we're down in July. I expect the cow herd here in Canada to decrease again about 1%. And I want to show you a little bit more interesting. Let's start off over in Alberta, where 43.9% of the cows are in the province of Alberta, 1.522 million. Saskatchewan's down a little bit. We used to be well over a million, 28.5% of the cow herd, about 989,000. So put those two provinces together, and that's the bulk of certainly the vast majority of cattle in Canada. Manitoba, though, has taken probably the biggest hit. If we go back only 10 or 12 years ago, we were sitting on 638,000 head of cattle. Today, we only have 377,000. And part of that is because we're so far away from markets, either in Madison, Wisconsin, or Dakota City in Sioux City, South Dakota, of course, or into when you're Red Deer or High River, Alberta. If we go across to Ontario, fairly big feeding state, though, 6.5% of the cows. Most of that's down in the southern area of in around London, Essex County, across towards Lake Superior and Lake Ontario. And then Quebec, 3.4. Of course, they have a lot of dairy cows. Atlantic Canada makes up less than or right around 1% of the cattle. So pretty low, only 3.47 million head of cattle. And I think that's pretty static number. I think, in other words, that's a pretty close number for July of 2025. What is interesting, though, I love looking at these. When I'm down in the United States, or if I'm talking in Alberta or Saskatchewan, I want to show you where the cow numbers are. Texas, 4 million head of cattle. They have more cattle than all of Canada, by about a million head. Oklahoma, 1.9. Missouri, I always talk about Missouri, 1.8 million. Nebraska, big feeding state, 1.597. If you go south by 20, 30 miles out of Lincoln, you'll hit all the feedlots. Alberta, though, 1.5. South Dakota, 1.5. Everybody kind of overlooks South Dakota. Montana, that makes sense. Kansas makes sense. Saskatchewan, 0.97. But Kentucky? Kentucky, what do you think of when you think of Kentucky? You think about Kentucky horse market, right? No, Kentucky has almost as many cows as Saskatchewan. And that's something that just continues to blow me away. If we look at our cow numbers, again, this is just beef cow numbers, where again, we're of course we're under our 3.5. BC beef cow numbers are pretty stagnant, very small amount. Alberta, they come down over the last 2 years. We expect them to come down by maybe 0.5%, maybe as high as 1%. But we'll see when Ag Canada comes out. Sketch beef, we already talked about that's below a million head. We were in 2023, we were right at a million head. Saskatchewan has had a fairly steep rundown. If you look, 1.5 million head around 2026 or 2006. So that rundown of 500,000 head of cattle is really, really, really tough on the industry. Canadian beef heifers, we 25 were basically 0.6, so pretty flat. I think we're going to have our beef heifers will be up this year, but not significantly. Again, up away maybe around 1%. Now, important, we're talking about, what's happening in the U.S. What are we doing in 2026? Look at our slaughter cattle. We're actually down from 2024 in our feeder cattle, in and around just over, say, call it 600,000 head of feeder cattle. A fair bit of placements, as we went into the fall, November particularly. Canadian feeder cattle exports right up to October. We don't have the NOV or the DEES numbers out yet from Stats Canada. Stats Canada always seems to be 6 months behind themselves. Not a knock on them. I just wish they would do it faster. But you can see that feeder cattle exports through, we're very high in the February, March area, a little bit higher in July, but pretty significantly below the 5-year average, which is going to be your dark check line. When we run into then, what about our Alberta fed? So are we sending, here's the question, are we sending a heck of a pile of fed animals south? Well, I would say pretty much average to the 5 years. We take the high in the February, March. We take a little bit of a jump in the May, June area. But all in essence, I think we're going to be pretty close to where we were in the 5-year average, maybe a little bit less than 2024. Again, we need to get that NOV and DEES numbers out. But I my sense on it as I see the buyers buy the cattle seems to be about the same as a year ago. What about our slaughter numbers, our cow? These are cow slaughter numbers, cow slaughter. Cow slaughter numbers, the price is ridiculously high for me, who is an analyst in the cow business. But 5-year average, there's the 5-year average in your check line, somewhere around about 15,000 head. And of course, 2025 was severely down. I think actually probably as we go through Jan and Feb, even in DEES, I think we're going to start to see November, probably see some cow slaughter numbers coming up. Now, do they go for exports? That's hard to say. Now, one of the things I've got to talk about here, and I should have talked about it back here, Mark, was that in Saskatchewan, I'm going to give you bare Saskatchewan numbers for the year of 2025. For the year of 2025, the price of beef at the supermarket, the retail trade, was up a solid 33% in Canada. 33%. Okay. In the United States, that number shifts to about 17%. So what ends up happening is if you are a feedlot owner, you would probably want to sell, or sorry, if you're a packer, you want to sell your beef into Canada versus United States. Why? Price difference at the retail. Simple as that. So it's kind of interesting when you look at the difference, and I'm giving you Saskatchewan numbers, by the way. Now, will that continue? Will that high price of beef, I was in Costco a week ago, some very, very nice steaks. These are prime rib steaks. There was 3 of them. They're about a pound a piece, and they were going for $105. $105. I should have took a picture. And I put those into the cart. My wife didn't see me, so I threw them in the cart, and we went around the backside of that aisle, and you hit the pork. You could buy 12 pork chops, and I think they wanted $9 for them, or something, 9 or $12 for them, for 9 pork chops. And she starts putting the pork chops in, Mark, and you know what my thoughts on pork is. But yeah, just to give you an example of the difference. So keep that in mind as you're talking about exports. We talk about Canadian beef exports by volume. Look at the vast majority is in your blue. That's that dark bluey color. Around about 82% of our beef goes south. A little bit into China, a bit into Mexico, a bit into Japan. Now, Japan gets our premium, what we would consider to be our gold or platinum, okay, beef. We get most of what we would get in the supermarket. It would be as high as sterling, wouldn't probably go as high as gold or platinum. A lot of that goes to Japan. South Korea a little bit, and into Hong Kong, Malaysia kind of area gives you an idea of the exports. And this is why I get frustrated with the Canadian government when they come out and say, hey, we're just going to export to other countries. Oh boy. Don't forget, there's other countries. Japan also gets beef out of Australia. South Korea gets it from Australia. China gets a lot of their beef out of Argentina, Venezuela, and Brazil. You just don't break in to a market very, very easily, not with 82% or around 400,000 tons. Beef exports to the United States, this is all in beef. This is beef exports, not cattle, to the United States. Pretty stagnant, kind of hit a top there in 23, 24, a little bit down. Value was up because, of course, the price of beef was up. Exports to Japan, I get way too many slides. I'll jump through these pretty quick. But again, yeah,
maybe,
go ahead.
Maybe was finding a good spot to try and filter this one in. There's a question in the chat. Came up just around currency. And so there's a comment that, with gold, precious metals falling, are other currencies gaining on US dollar, appreciating against the US dollar? What's the impact of US currency on what we're seeing for, import export demand?
Yeah, that's going to be very, very interesting. I think what we're assuming, Mark, is that gold, silver, copper does not go up any farther. Okay. Is this our plateau? A number of traders are saying yes, with probably, this is going to sound ridiculous, copper being the one that could take the biggest hit. Normally, I tell everybody that when copper's high, the global economy's really, really good. Why? Because copper's in everything, right? Well, copper's at record high, very, very high over the last couple of months. But why? Because the economy isn't doing very good. Well, it's because we are buying so much copper for our tech industry, our AI technology, and our storage capacity for AI information. A lot of people believe we're getting to the precipice of AI. In other words, that big demand for copper, big demand for chips, technology for AI is coming, will come to a close somewhere in the first half of 2026, which would then cause copper to fall off. I'm probably close into those camps. I still think that depending on what happens in the election, in the U.S., in the Senate race, and we heard what happened in last week in Texas, that if Trump, let's say, bombs, for example, Iran. Today, I think you heard that Israel bombed Lebanon. Whenever there is going to be strife in the world, significant strife in the world, gold is going to stay up. So same with, oil right now has a $15 premium on it right now. So what am I trying to tell you? it would depend on what really happens in American politics. United States bombs Iran, gold goes up, copper goes up, silver goes up. But what ends up happening in the background is our Canadian dollar goes up. I know that's going to sound weird. So what I'm not trying to shuck my responsibility is, honestly, I can't predict. I don't think even God can predict what Trump is going to do. And so what I'm looking at is simply more strife in the United States, more Canadian dollar. Now, I'm not talking significant, Mark. Okay. Will we get to 75 cents? That's very questionable. 72 and a half, 73 and a half, 74 maybe. 75 is probably outside the range of possibilities, but you never know with Trump. Is that an economist answer, Mark, or what?
I think that falls into the bucket of an economist answer, but
yeah. You know what? If we could get into Mr. Trump's head, we would make a lot of money, Mark.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? That was a phenomenal question. It is very, very, very complicated.
Nothing else in the chat right now, but just encourage everybody to keep them coming.
Yeah, because they are, wow, way better than the grain guys. The grain guys were so quiet. What about Mexico? Price of, really about the same as what we did in 2023. But value is higher, obviously. We like Mexico. If we can move it around United States to avoid, hopefully Mexico becomes an importer of Canadian beef, Canadian cattle, even maybe some what am I trying to say? Breeding cows, breeding heifers. There's a big thing right now about, China's going to save us in the beef industry in Canada. No, not really. They take very little, upwards of 30,000 tons, very, very, very little. Mark knows that I spent a lot of time in China. I understand the Chinese. My wife is Chinese. Well, maybe understanding is far too aggressive, but they like, in order, fish first, chicken, and then pork, and then beef. A lot of what's going to go into China is going to be our awful OFFAL, which is going to be your tail, your hooves, your mystery meat, I call it, right? When we talk about exporting nations, though, like, who are the big dogs? Look at Brazil. Brazil actually has a massive, massive cattle herd. Australia, India. They don't eat their cows, but they sure sell their calves. United States, a lot of people would, if I asked a group of particularly Americans, and I've asked them every time I do an ag outlook or do a market or cattle outlook in the United States, I ask them this question: who's the biggest exporter in the world? And everybody puts up their hand and say United States. Well, they're actually fourth. Argentina is a big exporter. Remember, I keep saying that. New Zealand, EU, Canada, Uruguay. Remember, I talk about Uruguay, and then Mexico. And then behind that would be Uruguay, Paraguay. I can't say that out loud. This is just our imports now. How much did we import? Well, we imported over $2.5 billion worth, or just about 350 million pounds. The vast majority of that is going to be in our dairy cow beef that's going into the fast food restaurants. Essentially, what we do is we send good quality beef south out of Western Canada, and we bring poor quality cow beef in from United States. This is just kilogram. This is Canadian beef cattle. This is beef and cattle exports, so about $7.35 billion worth, somewhere around about 760 million kilograms of beef go south. Now, beef producing nations. This is interesting. United States, 19%. Brazil, okay, that makes sense. Brazil, 18%. But China? China is the third largest beef producing nation in the world. And I always joke and I just say everybody's got one because there's like 1.4 billion people there. India is next. Argentina, Mexico, Australia, Russia. Russia exports or produces about as much beef as Canada does, but they eat, basically it stays within and you would not, let me tell you, there's two countries that you don't want to order a steak from, India and Russia. Not good. You could bounce a steak in Russia off the floor and it would probably stop bouncing in late 27. Our beef production, though, let's talk about our beef production here in Canada. Pretty solid in about 3.4 billion pounds, slightly less than in 25. And that includes slaughter exports and the offal that probably going to end up in India. Canadian cattle slaughter, just to give you an idea, certainly look at the high of 2005 at well over 3.5 million head of cattle, and now we're doing below 3 million in around about 2.8, somewhere in there. Western Canadian slaughter is obviously the vast majority. If we're doing, cuts in the, 2.8 range, about 2.25 is cut in Western Canada. The rest is done in Ontario and Quebec. Don't forget, a lot of cattle come out of Manitoba, come out of eastern Saskatchewan, headed off to off to Ontario and Quebec feedlots. Saskatchewan cattle, just looking, this is just slaughter. Canadian cattle for slaughter, giving you price, feeder cattle, but we'll go through some better prices here. Calves. One thing I want to point out on you calf guys, of course, as we get through August, September, November, we see some incredibly high prices for calves in the province of Saskatchewan. Cheap, fairly cheap diesel, cheap corn, cheap barley, some very high values going into the cut beef market in Canada, a little bit of going into the US, just is going to add. Now, annual steer weights, you got to be careful with this one. This is Canadian annual steer carcass weights, about 67 pounds that we put on annually, by the way, annual increase. So we're about the same as 2025. If I go to the US, it's around about, well, we call it 19, I call it 19 days when I do my closeouts on my pens. Heavier cattle weights, we will have heavier carcass weights. I think Canfax is probably, this is where I disagree with Canfax. That will end up having a little bit higher cattle weights. Probably, I would say probably 9 pounds that we're going to go up this year. Just from my closeouts of my pens that are coming through from late January. And I did some on the weekend. There we go. This is a better way of looking at it. This is our Canadian weekly steer weights as we go through 2026. There we are. So we're sitting somewhere between 990 and about 975. So above. So I was bang on to what we talked about. Weekly steer weights, it bounced over. We had up in 24 in Canada, and then the US sort of caught up with us as we go through January of 26. The amount of feedlot placements in Alberta and Saskatchewan, ladies, gentlemen, not to make too fine a point on it, nobody cares. And I don't say that jokingly, is the amount of cattle, the price is not going to be set for Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, or Quebec, or Ontario. We're going to set those south. really in the feedlots with over 1,000 head. So looking at the cattle on feed, though, look at the 5-year average. We are, still below for the majority of 2025, below the 5-year average, which supports what we'll be talking about in our slaughter. Alberta, Saskatchewan feedlot marketings, again, it's important if you are a packer or a feedlot owner in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, but really doesn't set much of a price. Feeder steers, this is Alberta fed steer price, right up until a week ago or a week and a half ago, I guess, sitting somewhere about 230. Pretty, if I was to, my father passed away, I think about 10 years ago, and he was a hardcore beef guy. And if he would, I don't think he would believe me if he said fed steers were $3. We used to sell fed steers in between 68 and 82 cents. And thought we were doing pretty good when we got to 82 cents. Weekly, this is just a weekly. I love this chart, though. This gives you the green line, ladies and gentlemen, gives you a 10-year average. The black check line gives you a 5-year weekly index. Then we have 2025, and then we have 2026. So incredibly strong Alberta weekly fed steer price. Came down a little bit over the last couple of days, last week. The one thing that's interesting is fed steer basis. I can show you charts, many charts, that would say that fed steer basis, cash to cash, now this is cash to futures, was about 8 cents, where we're averaging somewhere around about 10 cents. So we're pretty close to the long-term average. Let's go, though, when we start talking about Alberta, Nebraska, Canada cash to cash. So we converted our cattle from Nebraska into Alberta. That's our basis. There's our 5-year number. That 5-year number generally is going to be 11 and a half cents. And it's gyrated tremendously more than, this almost looks like back to our basis that we had when we had BSE, where we were jumping, week over week from negative $35 basis to negative $9 basis, or 9-cent basis. Tremendous variation, which is substantial when you look at it on your fed steer basis. It's very frustrating for feedlots to try to figure out what the hell is going on. Alberta, this is just Alberta annual. This is just giving you another look at it. But I like this 3-year average where we've drawn the line. This is fed steers, ladies and gentlemen, not calves, sitting right around 14 cents. I kind of use 11 cents just because if we're in southern Alberta, we probably take a penny or two off. If you're out in Saskatchewan, you're going to add. Manitoba's even worse because what we have to do is get them into Madison, Wisconsin, or Sioux City, South Dakota. I've got to unload those animals as I cross the border. I got to give them rest. I got to give them water. So that basis is much, much wider. But if I look at the feedlot profit and loss on a yearling steer, we can look at all of 2025 as being one of the most profitable years in, at least in my memory. We had some very, very high profitability down in the United States, after BSE. But, for Canada, this is Canada here. This is one of our most profitable, if not one of the most profitable feedlot years certainly in my memory. And my memory goes back to about 1978, just to give you an idea. D2 cow prices, wow. $2.20. We used to sell those for 30 cents. Mark, I'm dating myself. I even sold some D2 cows at 15 cents. Woo! $2.20, 5-year average. What am I going to tell you? $2.20. But that's one of the reasons why guys are anything that's a jumper, anything that's pain in the ass when you put them through the chute, anything that doesn't have a calf on her now or isn't going to calf, she slipped her calf or whatever. I'm telling you, the guys I'm hearing in all provinces, all states, I don't care again if I'm in Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario. They're letting those girls go. Just not worth it. Cow
Brad,
slaughter. We go ahead. Yep.
just back to that slide,
Mhm.
is there a scenario where D2 cows can be a little bit of a like an early indicator on increases or decreases in market, where we see price on these type of cows kind of dropping off as
You know
maybe.
what? I would argue on a factual basis that the calf price moves first. Basically what happens, Mark, is the retail price drops first. Okay, retail demand drops. Then what happens is your fives, your eights, and then your feds go in that order. In between that period of time, your D1, two cows start to fall. You got to remember that a lot of D1 and D2 cows, D1 cows in the United States is going to be actually become your steak sandwich in the United States. Canada, not so much, but your D2s are going to go into your mystery meat. Depending on how good they are, there's some good D2 cows that are probably right now going into the hamburger market, right? So probably demand and then price on your cat, and then in between that, probably somewhere between your 850s and your feds, we'll start to see those cows come off. You
um,
just go ahead, Mark. Yes.
yeah, no, there's just another question in the chat here from
Yep.
Trent. So his question is, can the basis volatility in Alberta plants be explained by packer manipulation on slaughtering more D1 to D4 when fed steer gets a rally?
Say that again, Mark. It's a very, very, very good question.
So can the basis volatility in Alberta plants be explained by packer manipulation on slaughtering more D1 to D4 when fed steer gets a rally? I'm not kind of following how that's
Trent,
spelled up.
that's a bit of a loaded question, buddy, because you put one word in there, manipulation. Um, there was times last spring, last summer, where there wasn't enough cattle going through those plants in the form of fed cattle that we had to kill cows. And in fact, maybe those D1 and two cows found the cut beef market. Um, it's also, let's jump back there, Mark, because I think that's an incredibly, there's our fed steer basis. Um, it also happens the time of year. As we go through week 31, 27, 28, 29, as we get through those weeks, those are pretty low numbers, right? Um, so uh, I've got to be careful how I answer that question because the manipulation is kind of throwing me for a loop. One thing I can tell you is that the gyrations in the amount of cattle coming to market also has an impact. I'm not Trent. Let me be crystal clear about something. Is I'm not disputing your question or your loaded question. That's not what I'm saying. But it's also the amount of what's being bought and how much are coming to market, and then what is the buyer doing? Um, the cut beef market too as well. One of the things I'm going to tell you is as the beef price rose in 2025, the Costco's, the Safeways, the Piggly Wigglies down in the United States, Sobeys here in Canada didn't want to be left with a whole pile of beef too. That all of a sudden the price moved on. So they were kind of hand to mouth. So that will cause it as well. The dollar difference will cause it. I would say all of Trent, you're not wrong. I won't tell you you're wrong, but I think there's probably a lot more to that than just one individual thing. and I tried to be as politically correct, Mark, as I possibly could without a totally.
Yeah. Sorry, Brad, you just froze
Here.
up there
This is
for
our eight.
1 second.
Am I back?
Yeah, we got you back.
Okay. You know what I'm going to do is maybe what I'll do is I'll jump in here, and I know we're probably way over time, aren't we?
We got about 20 minutes left in the
Okay,
time that
good.
we got lined up.
That's about almost perfect. We do want to leave some time for questions because the questions are absolutely awesome. So what are our 8-weight steers doing? You can see the 5-year, and then the 2026 is upwards into the $5 range. Incredible. Now, one thing keeping in mind, ladies and gentlemen, if you've got, by the way, for Mark, put up your hands if you got some 8s, 850s, 7s, 8s, 9s in the pens right now that you're going to look to sell. We probably will see some deterioration within that steer price, although the USDA report that came out on Friday is going to keep us a lot higher than we thought. We thought as we went through, say, week 9, 11, we still have a fair number of cattle coming to market, even though it's less on the yearly amount. So this cattle report that came out on Friday is going to be a solid price. If I had 850s in the pens and they were full feed, they're ready to go, I would probably get rid of them sooner than later. I don't think I would take them to 900 because I think by that time, we're looking at another 50 pounds, say at 3 pounds per day again. Um, for you guys that do get that, but call it 3. Um, you know, I would probably, if they're at 850, I would let them go this week, actually, to be honest with you. I think it's going to be a really good price as we go through Wednesday, Thursday. Just looking at fed steer basis always is usually around 8 cents. That's what I teach. Doesn't matter if I'm teaching in Saskatchewan or Alberta or Nebraska. Usually you can count on it being 8 cents. It did gyrate through in week 31 to week 35. Again, depending on the cattle, depending on what's happening with the marketers and what's happening with the buy side and also the sell side of the equation. 5 weights, we got up into some ridiculous $7 range, especially some showy cattle. One thing that I've noticed from what I'm hearing from the buyers, we always kind of liked going into Alberta with the reds or the blacks. We're kind of changing back again. It's kind of frustrating for you cattle guys. Back in the mid to late 80s, 90s, we kind of went from red, white face, black, white face, into, some of the more European French breeds like our Charolais or Simmentals. And then we got away from that through 2000s, kind of like those red or black solids. Now we're starting to look for a little heavier animal, a bigger, maybe taller, bigger frame. Now, please, you guys that are on the purebred side, don't crush me. I'm just telling you what the buyer's looking for. I know how frustrating it was because we had black, white, red, whites, and then we almost got them all nice cinnamon color with some good quality Charolais bulls, and then all of a sudden we had to go black, and it's kind of frustrating to keep up with the industry. But incredible prices, and I think those prices as we go through the fall of 2026, $7 I think is probably outside our realm of possibilities, but certainly where we sit today at the 650 range, I think is absolutely doable. I don't, unless, something would have to happen dramatically. Recession in the United States, we're going to be cautiously optimistic. That's not going to happen. I'm adamant in Canada, and I have been. Mark's listened to me for many years. I've been pretty accurate at predicting the Canadian market. I think we're going to be If we're not in a recession now, we certainly are going to be on the edge of the recession or a recession as we go through Jan and Feb. That's not worrying me because again, a lot of our prices actually set, but it will have some impact on current prices. Sorry, local prices, what I'm trying to say. Bread cow numbers, again, top of the line, $8,900, bottom of the line, $2,000. Now, Mark's heard this from this is my speech. If I'm a Saskatchewan cow guy, Alberta cow guy, Manitoba cow guy, cow person, I don't want to say guy, but cow person, and I got 250 cows and I'm going to buy 50 more heifers. I don't care what you pay for those bred heifers. If you are a young person that's got 50 head and wants to buy 50 or 100 more, buying them right now is doable, but with a very short amortization. I think if I was going to have 50 cows and going to buy another 50 cows and I was a young person, I would probably want to pay those off in 3 years. If I go longer, don't forget, when I got more cows, I need more land, I need more baler, I need more hay bind, I need more tractor. One of the things that I've learned over the many, many years of owning cattle is that, you don't buy cattle at the top of the market. That'd be like, 2 years ago, we had $26 canola, and today we're at $13 canola. The cows are not worth $8,900, ladies and gentlemen. You can yell at me. I don't care. I've been through this cycle 4 times now. So listen to me. If you don't listen to me, that's okay too. But the cows are worth solid, $2,500 to $3,500 over a 10 or 12-year period. That gives you a calf in the $3 range, somewhere in the $3 range. And that's what your calf is going to go back down to. How do I know this? I've tracked, I hate to tell you this, but I've tracked livestock prices, not back to 1883, all the way back to 1795. And we go through cycles. It's a 10-year cycle on average, can be 14, it can be 7 years. This cycle, actually, ladies and gentlemen, is going to be a little longer. If it wasn't going to be a little longer, you wouldn't have $8,900 cows. You would have $4,000 cows. So take it with a grain of salt. I'm quite sure Mark should get some really interesting questions or comments about that one. So
yeah, we do have a question in the chat. We've got about 10 minutes left right now, Brad. It's a question in the chat from Leanne, who's asking, why is there a 60-cent spread between heifers and steers in the 800 weight range? Will it tighten up at all?
No. I get this question. Will it tighten up? That's the answer to that is yes, it'll tighten, but it won't tighten to say 20, 30 traditional cents. The feedlots just simply, and if you're a cow person, you might not believe me. Well, I'm a cow guy. We had cows, okay? Yes, we fed a few, but I also work within the feeding industry. I can tell you that the vast majority of the feedlots would much rather take a solid framed steer than a solid framed heifer. The other, and that's just preference, pound a day again, that I think there also is, in all honesty, a bit of heifers get a bad rap. Can I say that, Mark? They get a bad rap. They just don't gain as fast. Well, it's probably because you're not feeding them properly. A heifer generally has a different specific diet than steers do, and everybody gets, no, they don't. Well, yeah, they do. If you are on top of feeders, you're going to feed, pen of 500 heifers different in their protein complex, in their carbohydrate complex than you are on a steer. I don't discount them as much if I was buying, but the livestock markets do. And that's basically it.
So maybe to put differently or to put you on the spot a little bit more, what would you expect that spread to be, kind of
26,
going forward?
26 would be normal. 20 to 26. I think that we will, as it tightens up, right now, you remember, right now as today, we've got a fair bit of cattle in the feedlot. Okay. Now remember, the whole kill of the whole year is going to be less. But right now, as of splitting hairs, as of today, we got a fair number of cattle in the feedlot, so we can be a little more selective on the price between heifers and steers. I think it'll come down into the 32 to 35 cent range.
Right on.
Okay, just looking at our Canadian federally inspected, we were down about 4%, 13 though. Remember that 13% from the peak of 2022 at about 2.85 million head. It's still well above the previous cycle low though in 2015. And 2015, you guys can't see my marker probably, but 2015 is right down in the middle there at about 2.48 million head. And with that, I got to back up for a second. Oh, I want to get, somehow we missed this one. I'm not sure why we missed this one, but this is our heavier out weights. Remember, we were talking about the question that we had is why did we have heavier weights and how many days? Well, over the six classes of cattle, outweighs are about 129 pounds heavier, 19 days, right? There's my anywhere from 19 to 53 days. We're adding sort of on average about 39 days mark, but 175 pounds is tremendous weight on our cattle. This was last week. If we go to Saskatchewan, 5 weights, here on the steers, they were 762. And unfortunately, look at the heifers, 6 weight heifers, 5 to 6 weight heifers they were a lot less, 596. Quite a bit difference, which is very different. If we go to Alberta, come back up here, you stupid thing. Sorry, Mark, I know I got to quit. But Saskatchewan or Alberta, 5 to 6 weights were 664, and the heifers were about 602. So actually, 50 solid cents, 50, 60 cent solid difference in Alberta and Saskatchewan. One last slide, Mark, before I let everybody go. I always do a 300 cow herd. My cost, now remember, if you're in the banana belt down, Mark, in southern Alberta, southern Saskatchewan, your feed cost is going to be less, but don't forget, I do this for north of Edmonton, north of Regina, Saskatoon. And our feed cost, this would be us growing our own forage and our own grain. And this is not silage. We got a short extended grazing period because we get too much snow. So around about $460. If you're in southern Alberta, southern Saskatchewan, you're probably going to be in the 420s for your feed cost. You're going to do a lot more swath grazing. Your straw is less right at the top. I got all in, all done. My operating costs this year are about $1,266. One of the big changes this year is the herd replacement, my bull replacement. Why? Because the cows are worth more. Bulls are worth more. So if I've got to pay myself $50,000 a year on 300 cows, I need $68. My debt payment on those cows, that includes my cows, my lot, my tractors, my hay binds, my pull trailers, if I'm baling, including all in $225,000 worth of debt, $750 worth of payment. That gives me a total cost of production at $2,644.06. I've showed this to probably close to 100, maybe 120 producers. One of the things that they're still saying I'm low on, I did increase my vet cost this year. They'd like to see $31. But I think but their straw cost is less than mine. Their straw cost comes in around $45, $42. So all in, all done, $1,266. Production cost all in, all done with my debt and my living, 2644. And that's where we end.
Got a couple things to wrap up with. Again, feel free, anybody that's got any lingering questions, to drop them in the chat while we look to close off. There is one from one of our listeners that says, not an economic question and more around recent regulations that have come in. But with respect to the CFIA, why would they want to put more obstacles in our industry when you look at average age of rancher in the industry, that type of thing? Any insights on your end, Brad, on recent labeling requirements?
Well, yeah, wow. Typical, and I shouldn't say, Mark, typical, but the federal government did meet with all provinces, cattle guys included, and then asked them what are they looking for. And the cattle guys basically said, we need an identification system. Okay. That, I would argue, is undisputable. In fact, the reports have come out, saying this farmer said this, that's a farmer said that, this group said that. That's undisputable. But in the classic federal government, particularly in this last government and this government, in typical fashion, they went from a simple idea of traceability to the most complex, most cost prohibitive, most ridiculously styled type of program, if I can put it to you that way. Thinking about moving, like we used to move our animals 2 miles, okay, to pasture in the spring and in the fall every year. And we did that since 1882, same bloody pasture. And, would I, under the new CFIA measures, would I need to have to phone and let them know? Certainly if I was shipping them, certainly if I was selling animals, theoretically you would have to, based on legislation. You can't do that. What they basically did is went to Belgium, and Belgium has the most restrictive, I would argue, cattle transportation, cattle identification system in the world, and said, you know what, we'll just times this by 2. And I make a joke about that, but it's basically the Danish system.
Another question in the chat, and we're good to run a couple minutes past as
absolutely,
new questions come in. But John's asking, what do you see as the biggest black swan risk for 2026?
Recession in the United States. That's easy. John, I should have brought a slide, and I do have a slide. It's not updated yet, but I do have a slide dating back to the 60s. And what I've done is I've charted the Dow, and then I charted periods of recession, and I overlaid the price of fat cattle, not because at that time we weren't feeding cattle. We were essentially, they're out on range. They would go into the feedlot. We usually sold our animals when I was a kid up until about 1986 as fed cattle. So I overlaid that, and you would not believe, John, I encourage you to, if you got the time to look at it, but you would not believe the correlation between recession and the price of beef. It's just that simple. If there's a black swan, a recession here in Canada is certainly going to affect the cut beef market. There's no doubt about it. But we're talking about, essentially a drop of 30 cents, 40 cents. In the United States, because they set that price, particularly a more aggressive recession, worse than average recession, I guess I would argue, would have a tremendous impact on the cut beef market, and for that matter, right down to the 5 and 6 week calves that you're growing out and selling in November, or doesn't matter, backgrounders doesn't matter, feeders doesn't matter. Nobody's asked me if they should maybe buy some calves, some 6 or 7s, marked to pasture this year. Usually I get that question all the time.
We might as well answer it because I'm sure it's in some.
You know what? What we know today. Yeah, you got to be careful of what you're buying in size, because now we're getting into $7. And maybe even certainly in between 6 and 7. You've got to be picking the right cattle. They got to be framey cattle. They can't be too, as the buyers say, greasy. You've got to be able to put those pounds on, so you got to be pretty particular. You don't need a dud in your, like if you're buying a pot, you don't want you can't have one steer that's a dud in that pot this year. It's I would say last year was a much better year, and I remember last year, if you remember, I said, yeah, go for it. This year I'm being a little more cautious. I gotta know that you guys are buying good quality animals. You want frame, you got to have growth. You can't buy them fat. And because it's been so warm, what are you guys down in the banana belt there? You're going to be in the teens this week. That usually adds to pretty fleshy cattle.
No other questions in the chat right now, Brad. Anything that you want to wrap up with before I close this out?
No, I don't think so, Mark. I think just as a summation, we're looking at a little longer cattle cycle than we would normally look at, which is positive to the cattle industry. That's positive. We got some very, very good, strong demand, particularly in the United States, in our demand side and our cut beef market. I think that the backside of that would be that recession in the United States. So there's a lot of program or positive. But even if $6 is a lot of money, if we could even stay, and everybody's going to be mad at me because they want $6.50 to stay. But I think if we're looking at $4.50, $500, $5 is still pretty good profit, Mark. $7 is getting up there, Mark. That profitability in the feedlot starts going away.
Yeah. Mark just dropped a question in here, and we've got a couple more that are coming in. So
good
to hang on. So Mark's question is, should we be keeping all heifers with the recession fear that's out there in the US?
I think that it's balance. I think in anything, Mark, you want to keep your balance. Okay. I do think, Mark, that this is probably a good time to get your cow herd young. Okay. Get your cow herd young. Get rid of the old girls that are just not producing, or the calf weight's going down or whatever. Would I be saving everything? I think that I'd be looking to increase my cow herd this year by, I'm not saying 50%, but I'm saying probably a solid 10%, maybe as high as 20%. But the first thing I would do is I would get rid of my old girls, get my cows young, because don't forget, whatever goes up must come down. And if you can get a young herd now, and be able to pay for it, those young cows are going to pay for it when the price starts to come back down.
Another question. I'm not sure if you've done some analysis on livestock insurance program, but a question from Dustin around price insurance. Should producers be buying that on their 2026 calf crop?
Let me just, my bar chart wasn't working. Oh, it actually is back working again. Okay. And that was Dustin, right?
Yep.
Dustin, I'm going to show you something. Okay, let's go out to, let's say you're going to sell between October and November.
You're not sharing right now, Brad.
No, I know. Okay. I just got to get it up there. And then once I found it, as soon as I've got it found here, Mark. I'm going to be sharing. There we go. Finally. Okay. Dustin, I'm going to give you my take. Oh, get out of here. Okay, we're going to move that aside there. Now, what you're looking at, Dustin, is you are looking at the Chicago Board of Trade, or sorry, CME, feeder cattle as of about 20 seconds ago. So 366.35. Now, first of all, Dustin, I got to tell you something. When you look at the Chicago, you are not, okay? Let me repeat that. You are not looking at 5 to 8 weight cattle. You are looking at 770s, okay? Now I could give you a 20-minute dissertation as to why it's 770 and not 5 to 6 weights, but let's forget about it. If you want, you can phone me and I can bore you for an hour. Now, if we look at that long-term price, if we were to go back, and I'm going to grab this actually, Mark, so we can look at it and start playing with it a little bit. Hurry up. There we go. Okay. Now, if we look at long-term price is going to be in the, let's draw a line here, is somewhere in between the 160 and 180 range. That's long-term, okay? So now why am I doing that? That's not the price today. Well, that's actually probably where we're going to fall back to eventually. Or probably on the 7 to 8s, probably somewhere in here, or about a $3 a calf. So if that's, let's say, if that's where we're going to fall back to, this period, this in here, when I'm up into here, and I'm up into here, Dustin, is where we are today. But what I'm actually trying to show you is what's your risk. Your risk is from here on 8 weights or on calves would be $3. That's your risk. Okay. So on calves, we would be saying $3, but we would be talking about $6 calves. Okay. Or $5.65 American calves. And in Canada, $6, $3. Okay. That's how you got to think about it. So the answer to your question should be very, very simple. If I can look at the futures and lock in some of these highs, and I think actually this week it'll probably go up yet again. I think we're going to almost broach the 380, but if I was at 366, between 366 and 380, I would, for God's sakes, take insurance. Why? My risk is $3 a pound. So what a recession, a strong recession would do, would have this come back to $3, or in this chart, $2.40. Okay? So think about it like this. When the price of canola was $26, and I said, guys, the bottom of that market is $13. Everybody thought I had rocks on my head. Well, what's the market right now? Little over 14, getting to 13. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Take it for, and it's fire insurance. It is what recession, Dustin, insurance is what I'm trying to tell you. Sorry, Mark, did I get on my soapbox? But I think that's true. I think that's the risk right there.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks for walking through that chart there. There was a question from Trent on whether it was just his
Yeah, it would have, well, it
screen
should have
that
been Trent's, right?
was a green screen, but I think your charts were coming through okay there, at least on my end.
Okay. But essentially, Trent, was think about it as a 5 to 6 week calf. Let's talk about a market, not at $7, at $6. The risk is $3 in a recession. And that's about right. It's 50% historically. Just take it from an old guy that's gone through this, lost his shirt.
Well, maybe a good spot to wrap us up there, Brad. We're a little bit past time, but I think some really good questions kind of throughout the day,
Fantastic
and
questions. Fantastic, Mark.
really really interactive there. So I don't know if you like Brad, you can also always share your contact details as well. That for people that might want to reach out with some specific questions too.
Just hang on a second. Let's do that right now. I actually forgot to do that, Mark. Now, let's be crystal clear here, everybody. And I'll start sharing my screen in just a second, Mark. Mark pays me the little pittance that I get, but as part of that, everybody, as part of that, you can phone me anytime. In fact, a lot of your producers, Mark, do. I've had actually this week, last week, I had a lot of calls. I even answered a call Sunday morning. So
yeah, I know. I'll just take a snip of that and drop it in the chat there as well. So
yeah,
you're good.
I think I gave you my wife's phone number though.
Yeah.
Yeah, anybody that phones me, you can tell that I love talking about agriculture, the cattle industry, the grain side. I'd be more than happy to talk to you. It doesn't cost you a cent. Hopefully you're doing business with innovation. If not, get a hold of Mark and let's get you signed up, because this is the type of information. And we do teach this, Mark, right, to all of your staff.
Yeah, this is part of stuff we go through regularly with our teams and sign them up for training with yourself. So definitely stuff that our teams are ready to talk to folks about as well. But want to thank you, Brad. Great session as always. Some good insights to the upcoming year ahead. Some great questions from everybody on the line. Just a couple items as we're signing off. I dropped a couple links in the chat there. One for our next speaker series on farm succession planning with Doug Carroll, and as well as the link to where the recording for this will be stored. So everybody will receive a survey for today's webinar, and we always appreciate the feedback. Watch your inbox for that. And as always, really appreciate everybody's attendance and making this a great informational session. So thanks, Brad, and thanks to everybody who's attended.
Thanks, Mark. I really appreciate it. But it's all about you, the farmer. You can tell I love and passionate about agriculture, but if without you guys, me and Mark are out of a job. So we really like you.
Well said. Okay. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Thanks, Mark. Talk to you later.